The late June sun was gratuitously beautiful, the kind of cinematic gold that wedding photographers dream of. It warmed the shoulders of my tailored tuxedo and cast long, elegant shadows across the manicured lawns of Rosewood Gardens. In the distance, carried on a breeze scented with roses and fresh-cut grass, I could hear the gentle, hopeful strains of a string quartet rehearsing Bach. Everything was perfect. Every detail, from the valet's crisp uniform to the impossibly white marquee tent glowing like a phantom against the deep green of the surrounding forest, was exactly as it should be. Exactly as I had paid for it to be. I never imagined I'd be the father barred from his own daughter's wedding. Yet there I stood, at the stone entrance flanked by overflowing urns of white hydrangeas, facing a security guard who was the very picture of polite, immovable obstruction. He held a clipboard like a shield. "I'm sorry, sir. Your name isn't on the list." His voice was professionally soft, apologetic even, as if delivering bad news was a regrettable but necessary part of his job. I felt a small, incredulous laugh bubble in my chest, but I suppressed it. A mistake, obviously. A clerical error in the chaos of last-minute preparations. "There must be a misunderstanding," I said, my voice steady despite the knot tightening in my stomach. I gave him my most reassuring smile. "I'm Arthur Sterling. Eleanor Sterling is my daughter. The bride." The name I expected would be a key turning a stubborn lock. Instead, the guard's expression shifted from professional detachment to a flicker of something uncomfortable, something akin to pity. He glanced down at his clipboard again, a pantomime of double-checking a fact he already knew to be true. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his gaze avoiding mine, "I was given specific instructions regarding this situation. I'm very sorry, but I cannot let you in." The world tilted slightly on its axis. Specific instructions. The phrase echoed in the sudden silence between us, extinguishing any hope of a simple mistake. This wasn't an oversight, this was a decree. The warmth of the afternoon sun suddenly felt like a clinical, interrogating light. In that moment, I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the stone pillars beside me, that Genevieve was behind this. I straightened my tie, a reflexive gesture to reclaim a dignity that felt rapidly slipping away. I gave the guard a single, sharp nod and turned back toward my car. I could feel eyes on me guests arriving, their faces alight with celebratory cheer, their curiosity piqued by the sight of a man in a tuxedo walking away from the wedding. Let them wonder. I would not make a scene. Not yet. As I reached my car, the gleaming black lacquer reflecting a distorted image of a man I barely recognized, a young waiter hurried past, a tray of champagne flutes balanced precariously in his hands. He nearly bumped into me, then did a double take. "Mr. Sterling, aren't you going inside, sir?" He was young, probably a college student. His confusion was genuine. "Apparently not," I replied, my voice a flat, colorless thing. The waiter's brow furrowed. "But I just served your ex-wife, Mrs. De Winter." He corrected himself, referring to her by her new husband's name. "She was just telling everyone how you backed out at the last minute. Said you couldn't handle seeing your daughter marry someone from a less wealthy family." My hand froze on the car door handle. The distant, beautiful music of the quartet seemed to warp and distort. "She said what?" The young man's face flushed with horror, realizing his gaffe. "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have repeated that. It's none of my business." "No," I said, and the word came out colder than I intended, sharp as a shard of ice. "I'm glad you did." So that was the narrative, the story Genevieve was weaving for her audience. I wasn't the devoted father who had footed the bill for this entire fantasy. I was the elitist snob, the shallow patriarch who put wealth above his daughter's happiness. The irony was a bitter acid in my throat. I genuinely liked Julian. He was a bright financial analyst from a perfectly respectable middle-class family, a man making his own way without the benefit of a trust fund or a powerful surname. I respected him. I had told Eleanor that, repeatedly. Behind me, the white tent pulsed with warmth and laughter. It was the centerpiece of a $175,000 celebration I had orchestrated. I had approved the caterer, tasted the ridiculously expensive cake, and signed the check for the very calligrapher whose elegant script had penned every name on that guest list but my own. A wave of pure, hot rage washed over me, so potent it made my vision swim. I was torn between the primal urge to storm inside and confront Genevieve, to tear down her carefully constructed stage, and the cool, rational need to walk away, to deny her the satisfaction of a public spectacle. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, a man about my age approached me hesitantly. I recognized him from the engagement party. Arthur Sterling, I thought that was you. He extended a hand. Robert Miller, Julian's uncle. I shook his hand automatically, my mind still reeling. Robert, good to see you. He glanced toward the venue, then back at me, a question in his eyes. A bit awkward, I suppose, standing out here while the party's getting started. More than a bit, I admitted, the dam of my composure beginning to crack. Apparently, I'm not on the guest list. Robert's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. That can't be right. You're the father of the bride. Tell that to the man with the clipboard. A deep frown creased his forehead. This makes no sense. Julian speaks the world of you. Just last week, he was telling me how grateful he was for all your support, financial and otherwise. That caught me off guard. Julian and I had always had a cordial relationship, but I hadn't realized the depth of his appreciation or that he'd spoken of it to his family. Did he? I began, choosing my words with care. Mention anything about me not attending the wedding? Quite the opposite, Robert replied, looking genuinely baffled. He said he was looking forward to your toast, said you'd been more of a father figure to him than his own dad in some ways. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the anger right out of me and leaving a hollow, aching void in its place. While I had been standing out here, stewing in a potent cocktail of humiliation and rage, my future son-in-law had been inside, waiting for me, expecting me to stand up and bless his union. My daughter, my Ellie, was in there, likely believing I had abandoned her on the most important day of her life because of some invented, monstrous snobbery. Something's not right, I said, the words more for myself than for Robert. Clearly, he agreed. Look, why don't I go have a quiet word with Julian? Get to the bottom of this. I'd appreciate that, I said. But please don't make a scene. It's their day. He nodded and headed back toward the music and the laughter, a man re-entering a world from which I had been exiled. I leaned against the cool metal of my car, the minutes stretching into an eternity. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Robert. Got Julian's number for you. He had no idea you weren't on the list. Says to call him as soon as possible. I dialed immediately. Julian answered on the first ring, his voice a frantic whisper. Arthur? What's going on? Uncle Robert says you're outside. I'm not on the guest list, Julian. The security guard turned me away. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then his voice returned, tight with a controlled fury. That's impossible. I personally reviewed the final list with Eleanor yesterday. Your name was at the top. Well, it's not there now. This has to be Genevieve, he hissed, his voice dropping lower. She's been acting strange all morning, giving the wedding planner last-minute changes. Eleanor has no idea, Arthur. She thinks you're just running late. So my daughter didn't even know. She was sitting in her designer gown, the one that cost $11,000, blissfully unaware that her father had been cast out like a beggar at the gates of her own party. Look, I'm going to fix this right now, Julian insisted. Give me 5 minutes. Don't upset Ellie, I cautioned, the instinct to protect her still overriding my own pain. Today is supposed to be perfect for her. It can't be perfect without her father, he replied firmly. Wait there. He hung up, and for a fleeting moment, a sliver of hope penetrated my despair. He was a good man. He was standing up for me, even against his formidable new mother-in-law on his wedding day. That took courage. 5 minutes passed, then 10. My phone rang again, but it wasn't Julian, it was Robert. His voice was laced with disgust. Genevieve intercepted him, he explained. She made a scene, claimed there was a last-minute dress emergency, some tear in the lace. She has Eleanor sequestered in the bridal suite. She told Julian that if he went against her wishes today, of all days, he'd be starting their marriage with a betrayal of Eleanor's trust. She claimed Ellie was the one who specifically requested you not be allowed in. And Julian believed that? I asked, my voice hollow. No, but he's in an impossible position. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. He can't get to Ellie to confirm without causing a massive incident. Of course, it was a perfect trap, executed with the ruthless precision of a military strategist. Genevieve had lied, isolated, and manipulated every player on the board. She had checkmated me. I understand, I told Robert, the words tasting like ash. Thank you for trying. What will you do now? I took a deep breath, the scent of roses suddenly cloying and funereal. Go home. This is Eleanor's day. I won't ruin it with a confrontation. That's exactly what Genevieve wants. Oh? The drive home was a blur. I turned my back on the glowing white tent, on the sound of my daughter's wedding, on the life I had built for her. Let them have their perfect day, funded by the man they had refused to admit. Let Genevieve play the gracious mother of the bride. Let her bask in her victory. But as the gates of Rosewood Gardens disappeared in my rearview mirror, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not over. The party could continue, but the reckoning was just beginning. The 25-year drive home from Rosewood Gardens took exactly 22 minutes. The familiar roads of our town, lined with ancient oaks and pristine, respectable houses, felt alien territory. Each intersection, each passing car, filled with ordinary people living ordinary lives, was an affront. How could the world continue its mundane rhythm when mine had just shattered? My house felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Genevieve had taken most of the good furniture in the divorce 8 years ago, the Art Deco pieces she'd had a passion for, the plush sofas, the Persian rugs. I had never bothered to fully refurnish. What was the point? The echoing spaces, the sparse masculine furniture I'd chosen for function over form had suited me. It was a house for a man whose life revolved around his work and his daughter, not for entertaining. Now, the emptiness felt profound, a physical manifestation of the hollowed-out space in my chest. I loosened my tie, the silk knot feeling like a hangman's noose. My feet carried me, on autopilot, past the living room and straight to my office. The room was my sanctuary, the one place that was unequivocally mine. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, a testament to a life of reading and learning. My desk was a large, formidable piece of mahogany, usually covered in market reports and investment portfolios. Today, it would serve a different purpose. Behind a mediocre landscape painting a security cliché, I know, but an effective one was the safe. My fingers found the dial, the cool metal familiar beneath my touch. I spun the combination with practiced precision, the soft clicks sounding like the tumblers of a lock falling into place in my own heart. The heavy door swung open with a sigh. Inside were the documents that told the true story of my relationship with my daughter. Not the manufactured narrative of an elitist father, but the paper trail of a lifetime of devotion. I pulled them out, one file after another. Trust fund statements going back to the day she was born, meticulously managed and grown over decades. Receipts for her education every semester at NYU, her master's program at Columbia. The deed to her apartment in the city, purchased so she wouldn't have to worry about rent while she found her footing. And last, the thickest file of all, the invoices for this elaborate wedding. I spread them across the gleaming surface of my desk, a mosaic of parental love expressed in dollar signs and cents. The venue alone, $42,000. Her designer dress, the one she'd looked so radiant in during her final fitting, $11,500. Catering for 150 guests, $36,000. The flowers, the photographer, the band that was currently playing for a celebration I was not permitted to witness. It all added up, every last frivolous, beautiful, painful detail, to nearly $200,000. Money I had been happy, thrilled to spend, because it was for Ellie. Among the papers was a photograph from her college graduation day. We were standing on the university lawn, my arm around her shoulders, her cap held triumphantly in her hand. We were both smiling, beaming with a shared pride that felt, in that moment, invincible. That was only 4 years ago. How had we gone from that to this? What poisonous whispers had Genevieve been feeding our daughter, year after year, to erode such a foundation? The rage I had felt in the parking lot had cooled, condensing into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Resolve. My phone rang, startling me in the quiet of the room. The caller ID read Sterling, my attorney, and one of my oldest friends. "Arthur, where are you?" he asked, his voice booming with the cheerful energy of a man on his way to a party. "I just got here. The ushers said you weren't seated yet." "I'm not on the guest list, Sterling," I said. The words were flat, devoid of emotion. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Then, "What? That's ridiculous. You paid for the whole damn thing." "Tell that to Genevieve. She's made sure I can't get in. Apparently she's told Eleanor I chose not to come." "Oh." Sterling's voice lowered to a growl. I knew well. It was the sound he made just before eviscerating a witness on the stand. That vindictive witch. "What are you going to do?" My hand hovered over the phone, over the scattered documents on my desk. For a fleeting second, I saw my little girl's face, age 5, beaming up at me as she finally managed to pedal her bicycle without training wheels. I saw the teenager who hugged me tight and whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you, Dad." Then I saw the polite, impassive face of the security guard. I heard the waiter's voice, repeating Genevieve's slander, and my decision, which had been forming in the recesses of my mind, crystallized. "Sterling," I said, my voice now as calm and clear as a winter morning, "I need you to do something for me, right away. Name it. I need you to freeze all payments from Eleanor's trust fund, immediately." There was a pause. I could almost hear the legal gears turning in his head, the calculations of consequences and complexities. "Arthur, that's a serious move. Are you sure you want to do that? That's the nuclear option." "She didn't just snub me, Sterling," I said, the words hanging in the air between us. "She didn't just forget to send an invitation. She actively had her own father barred from her wedding." "Jesus," Sterling muttered. "But still, maybe there's been some colossal misunderstanding." "Oh, Ken, the only misunderstanding," I cut in, my voice sharp and final, "is that she seems to have forgotten who's been financing her entire life. Every comfort, every opportunity, every advantage. This wedding, she's forgotten, and I think it's time for a reminder. This won't be simple to undo, Arthur. The terms of the trust—" "I'm aware of the terms," I said, cutting him off again. "I created them. Just do it." Another silence, longer this time. Then, with a resigned sigh, he said, "All right, Arthur, it's done, or it will be within the hour. The process is initiated." After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long moment. The house around me was utterly still. I had just detonated a bomb in the center of my daughter's life, and the fallout was still to come. I wondered idly if this was what Genevieve had wanted all along. For years after the divorce, she had spun her tales, painting me as a ruthless businessman who made moral compromises, a man who loved his work more than his family. Most of it was exaggeration. Some of it was outright lies. But Eleanor was 28 years old now, an adult, capable of her own judgment, and she had made her choice. I reached for the decanter of bourbon on my credenza, the amber liquid catching the last of the afternoon light. I stopped myself. No, I needed a clear head for what was coming next. This was not an act of drunken pique. This was a strategic realignment of the world. Instead, I went upstairs and changed out of my wedding suit. The tuxedo felt like a costume for a play I was no longer a part of. I put on a pair of jeans and a casual button-down shirt. I returned to my office, gathered all the wedding receipts and the trust fund documents, and slid them into a sleek leather portfolio. Then, I got back in my car. The engine purred to life, a low growl of anticipation. I was heading back to Rosewood Gardens. The party I knew would be in full swing by now. They thought the drama was over. They thought they had won. They had no idea that the main event was about to begin. The return to Rosewood Gardens was different. The first time, I had arrived as the father of the bride, filled with a nervous paternal pride. This time, I arrived as an insurgent. The golden light of late afternoon had deepened into the bruised purple of twilight. Fairy lights, woven into the branches of the ancient oaks, twinkled like a galaxy of captive stars. The music was louder now, a lively swing number that spilled out from the marquee tent, punctuated by bursts of laughter. A celebration in full swing. My celebration. I bypassed the main entrance, leaving my car in an auxiliary lot near the service road. I knew the venue's layout intimately. I had toured it with Eleanor and Julian months ago, nodding along as the event planner pointed out the charming rustic catering entrance and the discreet staff pathways. At the time, they were irrelevant details. Now, they were my points of entry. I slipped through the catering entrance unnoticed. The air back here was thick with the smells of cooking and the clatter of dishes, a world away from the perfumed elegance out front. I navigated the maze of corridors with a calm sense of purpose, the leather portfolio tucked under my arm like a diplomat's briefcase. I emerged into the soft evening air at the edge of the great lawn, shielded by a row of sculpted hedges. The reception was a breathtaking sight. Under the cavernous white tent, hundreds of candles and lanterns cast a warm, flickering glow. Eleanor was on the dance floor with Julian, radiant in her designer gown, her face alight with a happiness so pure it was almost painful to witness. Julian, handsome and beaming, spun her around as guests applauded, their faces reflecting the joyful, uncomplicated bliss of the moment. Across the tent, I spotted Genevieve. She was holding court, a champagne flute in one hand, gesturing animatedly to a circle of her friends. At 53, she was still a striking woman. Her beauty meticulously maintained a product of good genes, yes, but also of expensive salons, subtle cosmetic procedures, and a designer wardrobe, all of which, I reflected with a fresh wave of bitterness, I had funded during our 20-year marriage. Beside her stood Frank de Winter, husband number 2. A decent enough man, a retired architect who'd never done me any harm. But seeing him there, standing in the role that should have been mine, the proud, benevolent patriarch presiding over the festivities made my blood boil with a quiet, elemental fury. The first person to notice me was the wedding photographer, a nervous young woman with 3 cameras hanging from her neck like oversized pendants. She was trying to get a candid shot of the laughing guests and nearly backed into me. "Excuse me, sir. Are you with the venue staff?" she asked, her eyes flicking over my casual clothes, clearly trying to place the man lurking at the edge of this black tie affair. "No," I replied calmly, my voice even. "I'm the father of the bride." Her eyes widened, a flicker of recognition, then confusion. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I thought, during the ceremony there was someone else who walked her down the aisle?" I finished for her. The words were flat, factual. Yes, I imagine there was. Her stepfather, probably. The photographer was now deeply uncomfortable. "Right. Well, I should get back to it. The toasts are happening soon." She scurried away, but it was too late. The first stone had been cast, and the ripples were already spreading. A few heads turned in my direction. Whispers started, quiet at first, then growing in volume like the rustle of dry leaves. I saw Genevieve across the tent. Her laughter faltered. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the source of the disturbance. When her gaze finally landed on me, the color drained from her face. The carefully constructed mask of the gracious hostess dissolved, revealing the raw panic beneath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't run. I simply began to walk, moving with a deliberate pace from the shadows at the edge of the tent toward the brightly lit center, the leather portfolio held firmly under my arm. Eleanor saw me when I was about halfway there. She was in the middle of a laugh, her head thrown back, a picture of pure joy. The laugh died in her throat. Her champagne glass halted halfway to her lips. Julian, noticing her frozen expression, followed her gaze. His own face, moments before wreathed in smiles, clouded with confusion and alarm. "Dad?" Eleanor's voice was a fragile thread in the suddenly quieting tent. The band, sensing the seismic shift in the atmosphere, trailed off mid-song. 150 pairs of eyes turned to me. The whispers ceased. The world held its breath. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I offered a smile, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. It was a predator's smile. "I thought I should stop by," I said, my voice carrying with perfect clarity in the unnatural silence. "Considering I paid for all of this." Genevieve was moving toward us now, her face a mask of forced composure, her eyes shooting daggers of pure hatred. "Arthur, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave. Now." "Inappropriate?" I echoed, savoring the word. "Let's talk about what's inappropriate, Genevieve." "Inappropriate is excluding the person who financed this entire event. Inappropriate is having your own father escorted away from your wedding like some unwanted intruder." The tent was now utterly silent. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. Every guest was frozen, watching our family drama unfold in real time. Eleanor's cheeks had flushed a deep, mortified crimson. "Mom said you chose not to come," she stammered, looking from me to her mother. She said you couldn't accept Julian because his family isn't wealthy enough." I held my daughter's gaze, letting the full weight of her accusations settle between us. "And you believe that, Ellie?" I asked, my voice softer now, laced with a genuine sorrow that cut through my anger. "After everything I've done for you? After I told you repeatedly how much I like and respect Julian?" Julian stepped forward, putting a protective arm around Eleanor. "Mr. Sterling, Arthur, there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I cut in, my voice hardening again. "Your Uncle Robert can confirm I was turned away at the entrance. My name was deliberately removed from the guest list. Ask the security guard if you don't believe me." Eleanor's head whipped around to face her mother, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" Genevieve's composure finally cracked. A flash of pure panic crossed her features before she regained control, her voice rising, becoming shrill. "He's trying to ruin your day, darling. Just like he ruins everything. He's a manipulative bully. He always has been." "That's not true," a voice called from the crowd. It was Robert, Julian's uncle, stepping forward. His face was grim. "I saw him. He was turned away. The guard specifically said his name wasn't on the list." A wave of murmurs rippled through the guests. The narrative Genevieve had so carefully crafted was unraveling before her eyes. "Why would you do that, Mom?" Eleanor asked, her voice small, lost. "I didn't," Genevieve insisted, her desperation palpable. "This is another one of your father's games. He can't stand not being the center of attention." I remained calm, which only seemed to enrage her further. I walked to the nearest table, the one bearing the elaborate, 5-tiered wedding cake that had cost $3,200, and opened my portfolio. I began laying out the documents, one by one. The receipts, the invoices, the proof. "What's all this?" Julian asked, stepping closer. "This," I said, gesturing to the papers arrayed like evidence at a trial, "is the financial reality behind today's fairy tale. Every last receipt paid in full. By me." Eleanor's face crumpled. "Dad, please, don't do this here." I ignored her plea. I reached back into the portfolio and pulled out the final document. "And this," I continued, my voice dropping, commanding the attention of every person under the tent, "is a legal notice. Effective as of 1 hour ago, your trust fund has been frozen. Completely." A collective gasp swept through the tent. It was a sound I would never forget. Genevieve lunged forward, her face twisted into a mask of fury. "You can't do that," she hissed. "That money is Eleanor's." "Actually," I said, placing the document directly on the table beside the cake, a stark piece of reality beside the sweet illusion. "I can, and I have. The terms of the trust are quite clear. I maintain control until she turns 35. That's another 7 years." I looked at my daughter then, the little girl I had raised, the young woman I had supported through every stage of her life. The daughter who, for whatever reason, had decided I wasn't worthy of witnessing her marriage. Her face was a canvas of shock, betrayal, and dawning comprehension. "Your apartment lease is up for renewal next month," I said quietly. My voice meant for her alone, though everyone heard it. "The payment won't be coming from the trust. Neither will your car payment, your credit card bills, or any of the other expenses I've been covering. You're on your own now." With that, I turned and walked away. Behind me, chaos erupted. I could hear Genevieve's shrill, hysterical voice, Julian trying to calm everyone down, and above it all, the heartbreaking sound of my daughter's sobs. The perfect wedding was unraveling, thread by expensive thread. I didn't look back. I walked out of the tent, across the manicured lawn, and into the cool, indifferent darkness of the parking lot. There was no triumph in what I had just done, only a hollow, cavernous ache where my relationship with my daughter used to be. But as I drove away from Rosewood Gardens for the second and final time, I felt something else too. A strange and terrible sense of liberation. The charade was over. The lies were exposed. The phone in my pocket buzzed with a new message. I glanced at it at a stoplight. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the name was familiar. Beatrice, Eleanor's cousin, my niece. Uncle Arthur, the message read. I saw what happened. There's more to this story than you know. Can we meet tomorrow? There are things you need to hear. Sleep that night was a foreign country I could not enter. I replayed the scene at the wedding reception 100 times, each viewing a fresh exercise in self-torment. The shock on Eleanor's face, the collective gasp of the guests, the raw hatred in Genevieve's eyes. Had I gone too far? Or had I, after years of quiet capitulation, finally not gone far enough? Beatrice's text message was a single, cryptic beacon in a sea of confusion, and I clung to it. She arrived at precisely 10 o'clock the next morning. Beatrice had always been the sensible one of the younger generation, a grounded, pragmatic young woman who worked as a pediatric nurse. She lacked Eleanor's flair for the dramatic, but possessed a quiet strength I'd always admired. Today, that strength seemed tempered by a deep nervousness. She clutched her coffee mug in the kitchen, as if it were a lifeline. "Thank you for seeing me, Uncle Arthur," she said, her voice low. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to anyone from the family right now." "You're the only one who reached out with anything other than an accusation," I pointed out, pouring myself a coffee I didn't want. My hands were perfectly steady. My insides were a maelstrom. She nodded, taking a steadying sip. "What happened yesterday? It wasn't right, what they did to you. But there's a context you're missing, a reason Ellie was susceptible." "I'm listening." Beatrice took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into cold, dark water. "About a year ago, not long after Ellie and Julian got engaged, Aunt Genevieve told her something about you. Something she claimed was the real reason for the divorce." "Oh, May." A chill, entirely unrelated to the morning air, snaked its way down my spine. "What exactly did she say?" "She told Ellie that you had an affair," Beatrice said, her eyes fixed on my face, gauging my reaction. "With Jessica Thomas, her best friend from the high school swim team. She said you'd been secretly sending Jessica money for years afterward, and that was why the family finances were sometimes strained back then. She claimed you drained joint accounts to keep Jessica quiet." "Oh." I nearly dropped my mug. The accusation was so ludicrous, so utterly disconnected from reality, that for a moment I could only stare at her. Jessica Thomas. I could barely conjure a face. A sweet, lanky girl with a shy smile. She must be Eleanor's age now. I barely knew her. "That is absolutely, unequivocally false," I said, the words coming out in a choked whisper. "All of it." "I figured," Beatrice said with a grim little smile. "But Ellie believed it. Aunt Genevieve had proof." She made air quotes around the word. "Fake bank statements showing wire transfers, forged emails. It was a very convincing, very cruel performance, apparently." "Jesus Christ," I muttered, sinking into a kitchen chair. It was all falling into place now. The puzzle pieces clicking together with sickening precision. The growing distance over the past year. The stilted, awkward phone calls where she seemed to be questioning my every word. Her reluctance to include me in the wedding planning beyond the role of a human ATM. It hadn't been a gradual drifting apart. It had been a systematic campaign of poison. "Why are you telling me this now, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice raw. She met my eyes directly, and in them, I saw a fierce, protective loyalty. "Because Ellie is my cousin, and I love her. And I can see this rift destroying both of you. Aunt Genevieve has been manipulating her for years, twisting things. But this This was a new low. I tried to talk to Ellie to tell her it sounded insane, but she wouldn't listen. She said the proof was undeniable. Does Julian know about these accusations? Yes, she confirmed. He wasn't sure what to believe. He told me he found it hard to square the story with the man he knew, but he ultimately deferred to Ellie's wishes about the wedding. He's been caught in the middle of it all. Of course he was. A good man in an impossible situation. My anger, which had been a wild, scattered fire, now had a single clear target. Genevieve, how could I prove these allegations were false? How could I fight a ghost? Bank statements can be checked, I said, thinking aloud. Records can be verified. That's just it, Beatrice interrupted gently. Aunt Genevieve knows you can disprove the financial claims eventually, but the damage to your relationship with Ellie is already done. And that's what she wanted all along. The truth of her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had played right into Genevieve's hands. By retaliating financially, by freezing the trust, I had confirmed every terrible thing she'd said about me, that I was controlling, that I used money as a weapon. I had become the villain in the story she wrote. There's something else, Uncle Arthur, Beatrice said, hesitating. Something that might explain why she's escalated her campaign against you so dramatically. What's that? She and Frank are in financial trouble. Serious trouble. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. My husband, Mark, works in commercial banking. He can't give me details, of course, but their accounts have been flagged for months. They've remortgaged their house twice. They're drowning in debt, on the verge of bankruptcy. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with unspoken implications. A new, terrible possibility began to form in my mind, a suspicion so dark I was almost afraid to give it voice. Has Genevieve, I asked slowly, been asking Eleanor for money? Money from the trust fund? The look on Beatrice's face was all the confirmation I needed. Ellie mentioned something a few months ago about helping her mom with a temporary cash flow problem. I didn't think much of it at the time. She said she was happy to help. How much? She didn't say exactly, but she implied it was substantial. The final piece of the puzzle locked into place. The picture was now complete, and it was uglier than I could have ever imagined. Genevieve hadn't just been poisoning Eleanor against me out of spite or some lingering bitterness from the divorce. She had been setting the stage. She had been isolating our daughter, making her financially and emotionally dependent, all to gain access to the trust fund money. My exclusion from the wedding wasn't just a final act of emotional cruelty. It was a strategic move, designed to remove the only person who might scrutinize the accounts, the only person who would stand in the way of her grand larceny. I need to see the trust fund disbursements, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I pulled out my phone to call Sterling. Just be careful how you approach this with Ellie, Beatrice warned as she stood to leave. Her mother has had her ear for years. If you come at her with accusations, she might shut down completely. After she left, I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with Sterling. The fury in his voice was a mirror of my own as I relayed what Beatrice had told me. He immediately set his firm's forensic accounting team to work. Review every single transaction from Eleanor's trust over the past 18 months, I instructed. Every wire, every check, every withdrawal. I want to know where every penny went. The wait was agonizing. I paced the floor of my office, a caged animal. The lies about the affair were a deep, personal wound. But the idea that Genevieve had been using our daughter, our Ellie, as a pawn in a financial scheme, that was a betrayal of a different magnitude entirely. At 4 o'clock, Sterling called back. His voice was grim. Arthur, you need to sit down. I was already sitting. What did you find? The regular transfers are all their apartment, car, living expenses. But they're significantly larger than they should be, about 30% higher each month for the last year. And then there are the big ones. He paused. 3 large, lump sum withdrawals. One 100,000, another 75, and a final one, 150,000, just 6 weeks ago, totaling $325,000. My blood ran cold. Those would have required Eleanor's signature. They have her signature, Sterling confirmed, or what looks like it, unless someone forged it, I finished, my voice a dead thing. Send me copies of those authorization forms. Now, Ezer. When the documents arrived in my email a few minutes later, I studied the signatures on the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. They looked authentic. Her familiar looping cursive was there. But something felt off. Too perfect. Too practiced. I went to my safe and pulled out older documents, her first apartment lease, a power of attorney form she'd signed before studying abroad. I laid them side by side on my desk. The difference was subtle, but to a father who had watched his daughter's handwriting evolve from the clumsy block letters of childhood to the confident script of a young woman, it was unmistakable. These were forgeries, very, very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. The phone rang again. It was Sterling. "I've been digging into the wire transfers, Arthur," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "The money didn't go to any of Eleanor's accounts. It was transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "The account is registered to a shell company. It's called Genevieve Vista Holdings." The name of the shell company, Genevieve Vista Holdings, was so brazen, so arrogant, it was almost laughable. She hadn't even tried to be clever. It was the act of a woman who believed she was untouchable, who had become so accustomed to manipulating the world around her that she'd forgotten that actions, especially those documented by international banking systems, have consequences. But the cold fury that discovery ignited in me was quickly tempered by a wave of profound, aching sorrow for my daughter. Exposing this wouldn't just be about justice for me, it would be about demolishing the very foundation of Eleanor's world. She would have to confront the fact that her mother, the woman she had trusted and defended, had not only lied to her about the most fundamental aspects of her family, but had also systematically stolen from her. It was a truth so monstrous it could break a person, and my first, most powerful instinct was to protect her from it. I spent the rest of the day in a state of controlled crisis, formulating a plan. This was no longer about a wedding snub or a frozen trust fund. This was a rescue mission. By evening, I was ready. I picked up the phone and called Eleanor. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice small and wary. "Dad, I didn't think you'd want to talk to me," I said, my tone gentle, devoid of the anger from the day before. "You're my daughter, Ellie. That doesn't change." She was silent for a moment. Then, hesitantly, "About the trust fund." "I need to see you," I interrupted softly. "There are things we should discuss face to face. It's not about the wedding. It's not even about the trust fund. Not really. It's about something else entirely." "What things?" she asked, suspicion coloring her voice. "I'd rather not get into it over the phone. Can you come to the house tomorrow? Alone, please. No Julian. And definitely no mother." She hesitated, and I could hear the internal battle raging. Is this some kind of trap? The question stung, a sharp reminder of how deeply Genevieve's poison had taken root. "No, Ellie," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "This is me trying to protect you. Please, just come." After another long pause, she agreed. "Tomorrow at noon." When she arrived the next day, she looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled. The glow of the bride was gone, replaced by the weary pallor of someone who had been crying for 24 hours straight. "You look terrible," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It was what I always said when she was stressed or sick, our own gruff shorthand for, "I'm worried about you." A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. "Thanks, Dad, always the charmer." I led her into my office. I had been selective, arranging only the key documents on the desk. This had to be done carefully, piece by piece. "I've unfrozen the trust fund," I said without preamble. Her eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Oh, why?" "Because freezing it was a reaction made in anger and hurt," I admitted. "It was the wrong way to handle things." "Thank you," she said quietly. "But that's not why I asked you here." I took a deep breath. "Ellie, I need to ask you about these." I slid the trust fund disbursement records across the desk, the 3 large withdrawals highlighted. She glanced at the papers, then looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. What about them? Did you authorize them? Yes, she said, her eyes fixed on a point over my shoulder. Ellie, look at me. When she reluctantly did, her gaze filled with a familiar, stubborn defensiveness, I asked again, what was the money for? Her words came in a rush, as if she'd been rehearsing them. Mom needed it. Frank's business has been struggling, and they were going to lose the house. She said it was just a loan, that she'd pay it back as soon as things stabilized. No. Did you sign these authorization forms? I pushed the documents toward her. She glanced at them again and nodded. Yes. Are you sure? I held her gaze steadily. Look at the signatures. Really look at them. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She picked up the top form, her brow furrowed in concentration. I don't remember signing these specific forms, but I must have. The signature, it looks like mine. It looks like yours, I agreed gently, but it's not. They're forgeries, Ellie. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. That's impossible, she protested, her voice rising. Mom would never… Ellie! I cut in, my voice firm but not unkind. I need you to listen very carefully. Your mother has been lying to you. Not just about me, but about many things. I slid another document across the desk, the printout from Sterling's investigation. The money from these withdrawals didn't go to save their house. It went to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account registered to a company called Genevieve Vista Holdings. Her face went pale. She stared at the paper, her hands beginning to tremble. No, that can't be right. I have the banking records, Ellie. Sterling traced the transfers. Her head fell into her hands. Why? She whispered, the sound muffled. Why would she do this? This was the critical moment. I could have destroyed Genevieve then and there, detailed her spending, the lies, the affair story. But my goal wasn't to destroy her mother. It was to save my daughter. People do desperate things when they're in financial trouble, I said carefully. Your mother and Frank have been struggling for years, worse than you know. She looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. So she stole from me? She used me? It appears that way, yes. I let that sink in before delivering the final necessary blow. And all the things she told you about me, the affair with Jessica Thomas, the drained accounts, all lies. Her tears began to fall in earnest. How can you be sure? Jessica is back in town. She's willing to meet with you, Ellie, to show you her college transcripts, her social media posts from that time, to prove that what your mother claimed was physically impossible. She was 3,000 miles away. And, oh God, she sobbed, a raw, broken sound. I'm such an idiot. I believed everything she told me. I let her convince me to exclude my own father from my wedding. I moved around the desk and put a hand on her shoulder. It was the first time I had touched her in almost a year. She leaned into me, her body shaking with grief. You're not an idiot, Ellie, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You trusted your mother, as any daughter would. She abused that trust. That is on her, not you. She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and mascara. What happens now? Are you going to have her arrested? The question hung in the air between us. It was the question I had been asking myself all night. That depends, I said slowly. Partly on you, and partly on what she does next. Eleanor stayed for hours. We talked through everything. By the time she left, she was emotionally exhausted, but her eyes were clear for the first time in years. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, at the ungodly hour of 7 a.m., my doorbell rang insistently. I opened it to find Genevieve on my doorstep, her face a mask of rage. You son of a bitch, she spat, trying to push past me into the house. I blocked her way. What have you told Eleanor? The truth, I replied calmly. Something you should try sometime. You've turned my daughter against me, filled her head with lies. An interesting accusation, coming from you, I noted, my voice dangerously soft. Would you like to discuss Genevieve Vista Holdings or the $325,000 you stole from our daughter? The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked her age, the carefully constructed facade of eternal youth and confidence crumbling into dust. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Yes, you do. And so does Eleanor now. And soon, so will the district attorney. Unless, I said, delivering my ultimatum, you make this right. Uh, her composure cracked completely. It wasn't stealing, she shrieked. It was a loan. I needed that money. Frank's business was failing. We were drowning. So you committed wire fraud and identity theft, using our daughter as your victim. I was going to pay it back, she insisted, but her voice wavered. With what money, Genevieve? I asked coldly. Sterling's people have already been looking. That offshore account is nearly empty. You spent almost all of it. A down payment on a villa in Barbados, I believe? New cars? Shopping sprees? Her eyes widened in shock and fear. The anger was gone, replaced by the primal terror of being caught. What are you going to do? That depends on you. You will return every single cent you took from Eleanor. You will confess everything to her, the financial fraud and the lies about me and Jessica Thomas. And if you do, I might consider not pressing charges. MC, I can't return it, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. It's gone, most of it anyway. Then you'd better find a way, I said, my voice like stone. Sell your house, liquidate your assets, whatever it takes. You have 48 hours to come to my lawyer's office with a repayment plan and a signed confession. After that, he files the report. I closed the door on her sputtering protests, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The queen had been cornered. Now it was time to see if she would abdicate her throne or let it be consumed by fire. The 2 days that followed were a tense, suspended period of waiting. I wasn't sure Genevieve would comply. Part of me, a dark, vindictive part, almost hoped she wouldn't. It would make things simpler, cleaner, justice, served cold and clinical by the legal system. But another part of me, the part that remembered the young woman I had once loved, the mother of my child, knew that path would only lead to more wreckage, more pain for Eleanor. Just before the 48-hour deadline expired, Genevieve showed up at Sterling's office. He called me immediately after. She wasn't the raging fury from my doorstep. She was a broken woman. Her carefully maintained appearance had shattered. She had sold what she could: jewelry, designer clothes, her car, and managed to scrape together a little over $120,000. It's all I have, she had told Sterling, her voice devoid of its usual theatricality. Frank found out. He's filing for divorce. The house was in his name. I can't sell it. She signed everything Sterling put in front of her. A legally binding agreement to repay the remaining $200,000 over time, and a full, written confession. The confession was the hardest part. Admitting to the fraud was one thing. Putting into words the calculated, cruel lies she had told about me and an innocent young woman was another. But she did it. The fear of prison, it turned out, was a more powerful motivator than pride. The final act took place in the sterile environment of Sterling's conference room. Eleanor, Julian, Sterling, and I sat on one side of the long mahogany table. Genevieve sat alone on the other. She read her confession aloud. Her voice was flat, robotic, as she detailed the financial deception and the fabricated affair story. She offered excuses, desperation, fear, a twisted need to ensure Eleanor would choose her over me, but they were flimsy justifications for an unforgivable betrayal. Eleanor sat in silence throughout the entire recitation, her face a mask of controlled emotion. When Genevieve finished, her voice trailing off into the heavy silence, Eleanor asked just one question. Why? It was a simple, devastating word. Why would you do this to me? To us? Genevieve seemed genuinely bewildered by the question, as if the answer should have been obvious. I needed the money, she said, and I needed you on my side. So you decided to destroy my relationship with my father, to steal from me, and to ruin the reputation of a woman I considered a friend, Eleanor stated, not as a question, but as a final damning summary. Genevieve had no answer for that. Eleanor stood up, looked at the woman who had given her life, and then tried to ruin it, and walked out of the room without another word. In the weeks and months that followed, Genevieve's carefully constructed world collapsed completely. The divorce was swift and brutal. Frank, humiliated and furious, took his share of their remaining assets and moved to Arizona to start over. Her social circle, once so vital to her identity, evaporated overnight as rumors of her actions. The lies, the theft, the disgrace at the wedding spread like wildfire. She was a pariah. Eleanor and Julian postponed their honeymoon. Instead, they used the money, along with their own savings, to make a down payment on a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, one purchased without a single dollar of assistance from either of their parents. Eleanor, to my immense pride, found a job with a marketing firm. "I need to be independent," she told me over dinner one night, one of our new Sunday traditions. "I've been leaning on that trust fund my whole life, thinking it was a safety net, but it became a cage. The money will still be there when I'm 35, but until then, I want to build something that's mine." "That's a very mature decision, Ellie," I said, my heart swelling. She gave me a small, wry smile. "I learned it from you, Dad, watching you rebuild after the divorce. You never complained, just kept moving forward." 6 months after the wedding, I received a surprising call from Sterling. He forwarded me a news article from a local paper in Barbados. Genevieve had been arrested. In a final, desperate act, she had flown to the island and tried to sell the partially built villa she'd made the down payment on with Eleanor's money, a property she didn't fully own. "She's facing fraud charges in Barbados now," Sterling explained. "They take that sort of thing very seriously down there. She could be looking at actual jail time." I shared the news with Eleanor. She took it with a surprising, quiet equanimity. "I feel sorry for her, in a way," she said, looking out at the small garden she and Julian had started in their backyard. "She destroyed everything she ever had. And for what? Money she couldn't keep? Respect she didn't deserve?" Genevieve was eventually sentenced to 18 months in a Barbadian prison. When she returned to the States, she was a shadow of her former self. The carefully maintained beauty had faded, replaced by the harsh lines of regret and hardship. She found work as a cashier at a grocery store, living in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. She tried, occasionally, to contact Eleanor, but my daughter maintained strict, healthy boundaries. There would be no reconciliation, not in the way Genevieve wanted. Some betrayals cut too deep. As for me, I kept my promise to myself. I refurnished my house, not with expensive pieces meant to impress, but with comfortable chairs and shelves filled with books and art I actually liked. I started dating again, eventually meeting Catherine, a witty, intelligent widow who understood the complexities of family and the importance of second chances. Our relationship, Eleanor's and mine, was rebuilt slowly, carefully, on a new foundation of truth. Our Sunday dinners became a cherished ritual. A year later, she and Julian welcomed their first child, a beautiful baby girl they named Sarah. The first time I held my granddaughter, a tiny, perfect bundle in my arms, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I established a new college fund for her, one structured by Sterling with such ironclad protections that no one could ever access it for any other purpose. One evening, as Eleanor and I sat on my back porch, watching Julian push little Sarah on a swing, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know what the worst part of it all was?" she asked quietly. "It wasn't the money she stole. It wasn't even the lies she told. It was that she robbed us of years we could have had together, years I can never get back." "We have now," I reminded her, my voice thick. "And all the years ahead, because you didn't give up on me," she said, her eyes shining with tears, "even when I gave you every reason to." I smiled at my daughter, my wonderful, resilient daughter. That's what real love is, Ellie. Not the kind you can buy with trust funds or designer weddings. It's the kind that stays, even when it's tested by fire. In my office, the mediocre landscape painting that once hid my safe was gone. In its place hung a new family portrait. Eleanor, Julian, baby Sarah, and me. We were all smiling. The safe was still there, of course, its contents secure, but it was no longer the focus of my life. My focus was on the future, a future I was building for myself, filled with travel, with charity, with Catherine, and most importantly, with the restored love of my daughter and her beautiful family. And Genevieve? The last I heard, she was still working at that grocery store. Sometimes I see her around town, looking older than her years, the weight of her choices etched permanently into her face. I don't feel satisfaction when I see her, only a vague sadness for what might have been. But that was her choice, not mine. My choice was to move forward, to build something new from the ashes of what was destroyed, to focus not on revenge, but on rebuilding what truly matters. And in the end, that is the best revenge of all: living well.